I'll start by talking about my journey. So I started in my school board about 12 years ago, and I got an LTO. You know, we all get excited when we get those. And
does everybody know what an LTO is?
Yeah, I'm assuming
this is another acronym.
Yeah. So this is, if you don't, I was covering someone's maternity leave. So it's your way to get into the school boards, make connections, and you actually get to have your class, and you have an actual position as opposed to supply teaching where you go into different schools every day. So that position was an ESL ELD, as an ESL ELD teacher, and it also has some phys ed with it. That was my first experience with a student in ELD programs, and I'll explain exactly what that means in a couple minutes. I had a young lady in my group who was from Afghanistan, and she had been terribly traumatized to the point where she couldn't go into a lot of classrooms and participate in phys ed. And we had to create an alternative schedule for her where she was maybe with her classrooms sometimes, but only with teachers she felt really comfortable with, and she wasn't able to go into classrooms with male teachers. So this is a girl who experienced extreme trauma. A lot of times she was working with me in small groups, and we had to be very sensitive with her around a lot of things. And her whole family, there was a group of 9 girls with their mom living together. And then I took a permanent position the following year as a grade 7 teacher, and I was a classroom teacher, and I had 2 students who would fall into the ELD category in my grade 7 class. One of the boys came from Bangladesh, and the other young lady was from Jamaica. And just to let you know, sometimes these kids will get really intensive programming. In the Toronto board, they have a program called LEAP that some kids get to go to, but not all, for different reasons. And they get really intensive programming, and they might get bused into a special school where they have a teacher for most of the day who really teaches them intensive literacy skills. These are children who generally haven't been to school. I'll get into that definition a little bit later. So it's not just that they're learning a new language, they're also learning to read and write for the first time in a new language. So it's quite complex, everything that's happening. However, there's a lot of children that are going to be in your classroom, and at some point, you probably will, throughout your career, have a student like this in your class. And you may or may not have a lot of support from an ESL teacher like myself. I know that year there was an ESL teacher in the school, ESL ELD teacher, and he was able to support me 2 periods a week. So the rest of the time his child was with me, and I was in charge of his programming. We managed to find a co-op student to come in, particularly the boy from Bangladesh. The girl from Jamaica had been there a couple of years, so she kind of had a foundation, and we were able to really use her oral language skills. But the gentleman from Bangladesh, he really needed, he didn't know how to read and write in any language. So there were, I had taken my part 1 ESL NQ, but I hadn't really learned about these students in that course. You know, I learned a lot about second language teaching, but I really wasn't prepared, and I didn't have a lot of strategies. I just made things up as I went. And one thing I did a lot of was using peer support. There were picture books. I'd have students, you know, at the beginning they all wanted to read to him, so they take turns doing some reading with the student. We have found a lot of online things for the students to do, different activities. While I was teaching, you could go online and practice some basic literacy skills. I tried my best. It wasn't perfect, and I really felt that there was a lot more that could be done. And the following year, I got my current position. An ESL ELD teacher position came up, so I applied for it. And from then on, I've been working with ELD students in the school that I work in. There's a lot of students from ELD programs, and that's probably because we live in a lower socioeconomic area, and so there's a lot of that has to do with poverty. It might be refugee status. There's different reasons. Sometimes these children are the children of migrant workers, and the parents have had quite a struggle and journey to get citizen status and be able to sponsor their child. and a lot of times they have a spouse and a new family, and then their own children, once they're established here, they can sponsor them to come up, so they may not have seen them for 6 or 7 years, or just on vacation, and these children may not have been going to school, depending, living with grandma and grandpa, or their mom or their dad back home. So there's a lot of complex reasons why children don't have access to schooling in their home countries, yes. So I just wanted to tell you briefly the story of the day I accepted my job. It was kind of strange because I bought a magazine that day, Toronto Life magazine, because I had just been visiting my parents and it had the 10 best restaurants in Toronto. And there was an article in it called The Prisoner, and I was like, oh, what's this? And I read the article, and it was about a boy who was in the ELD program at my current school I just accepted the job at. So it was a really kind of strange moment for me, but these kids have really been important to me in my life and my career since then. You know, and it was a story, it was a sad story about a child who really struggled with education here. And there was a lot of resistance and conflict, and he ended up in gangs and in prison. It's a complex story. And he had kind of come to the end of that and had connected with a social worker when he was around 19 years old and was starting to get his life together and planning to be a social worker himself. And he kind of wrote this autobiography that he included in that article. That article actually was a great resource to use with the kids to read through it. I had to censor some of it, unfortunately, because I'm working with young children and some of the topics were pretty heavy. But it was a great kind of tool to use with them to read through and have some great discussions and connect to their lives. So I think it's really important, especially with any student, but especially with this group of kids, to make those really deep connections. You can imagine if you've stayed at home and haven't really gone to school much, you're used to just being around adults, probably getting a lot of attention from your grandma and grandpa or your mom or whoever's at home taking care of you. You're not used to being around other students, people your own age, in a large group, even being in a building, standing in a line, sitting at a desk, all these things are going to be foreign to you. And it's quite a struggle for these kids. And a lot of times when they start, when they aren't following classroom rules, it's not because of entitlement or because they're trying to be disrespectful. A lot of times they just don't understand the rules and how things work in schools. So that's my next slide, and I have some images I'm using here, and I have little numbers at the bottom. I'll put my PowerPoint up for you. I have a list at the end of the websites I got these images from, and they're all kind of connected to this topic, so you can look through them and get more ideas. So I really like this picture because you have these kids, they have this dream, I'm in Canada, I'm going to graduate, you know, be able to get a great job, support my family, but they also have a lot of fears of dropping out of school and poverty. And these are, unfortunately, real fears. So today I'm going to talk to you specifically about 2 girls I'm working with right now. I'm going to use pseudonyms for them. And I actually have a video of some of their work as well. So it's going to be hard for me not to use their real names. But we have Amira and Vanna. Amira arrived at my school in January. She came from Lebanon through Syria. She was able to go to school in Syria for grade 1 and part of grade 2. But then the family left Syria and went to Lebanon, where they lived for the last 2 or 3 years. When she was in Lebanon, her family put her in a private school because the public education system wasn't open to Syrians. But actually I was just talking to Amira yesterday about that school and how the teachers used to hit them. She was there for about 6 months, and when we had the initial interview, the father was talking about how it was a really bad school. So it was expensive, the family didn't have a lot of money, it was a school where the kids were getting hit and they weren't really learning very much, so they chose to remove the children from school. So she really only has about 1.5 to 2 years of schooling, and she's in grade 6 now. The one thing the family did do, however, was there was like a tutor that worked with a group of kids, and they kind of would meet outside under a tree and try to do a little bit of literacy development. We have a girl who's just arrived at grade 8 actually now, who's also from Syria. I don't work with her directly, but I do know she actually is a student who is not needing ELD programming because I think she's older, so she has a really solid basis in education, really strong literacy skills in her first language. She did get a chunk, so she's not needing ELD programming, but Amira and Bana are. Bana arrived a couple of months later, and the girls knew each other. They lived in the hotel you probably heard about in Toronto. People had to stay there for a couple months. The girls hated that hotel. To them it was just as bad as Lebanon, and they really were not happy in Lebanon either. Both of them have, we were talking about how they feel about Canada. Amir likes Canada, but she loves Syria, and she wants to go back. Whereas Vanna loves it here, and she's having a positive experience. So all the kids are very different, and they're going to have different reactions. With Vanna, with Amira, she does have some Arabic literacy skills, which we're able to build on, and so we can use some of the dual language resources. However, I'm finding with Vanna that she doesn't have written literacy skills in Arabic, and she also is even just having a lot of trouble with the alphabet. So I'm having to do a lot of work around just sounding out vowels and things with Vanna. Whereas with Amira, I can get into some much more complex activities. So this is an official definition from the Ministry of Education for students in ELD programs. So they most often come from countries in which their access to education has been limited, and they have had limited opportunities to develop language and literacy skills in any language. Schooling in their countries of origin has been inconsistent, disrupted, or even completely unavailable throughout the years that these children would otherwise have been in school. As a result, they arrive in Ontario schools with significant gaps in their education. What is an ELD program? So in general, with an ELD program, you have intensive literacy instruction for the first 2 to 3 years. And then after that, the students move on to the ESL STEP continuum. There's actually, one of the things with the STEP for ELD is it is different from STEP for ESL programs. And the ELD program STEP also includes a piece called Orientation to School Life in Ontario. And you, as a teacher, when you're writing these students' learning skills on their report card, and throughout the year, can build in supports to support students with their learning skills and modify those expectations so that the students aren't just getting N's. Because you can imagine if you're not used to working in a group of students, it's going to be hard and you're going to need a lot of support with that. Keeping a planner, taking homework home, all these things are things you're going to need a type of plan with support. So I actually just am going to briefly show you on the EduGames website, you can find this. This is the Orientation to School Life in Ontario STEP. And once you start writing report cards and teaching in the classroom, you'll know that there are 6 learning skills. And you as a teacher are supposed to be assessing those throughout the year and reporting on them. And so what they've done with STEP is they've looked at the 6 learning skills and they've categorized it from developing, building, consolidating, I believe is the next one, and then sustaining. And so you can use this to kind of build a plan of action of how you're going to support the kid when transitioning into the class. And I know in the Toronto board they do have the LEAP program, and the LEAP program I was mentioning earlier. I was speaking to the woman that was coordinating that. She said that usually what they want is the kids to stay in their home schools in the classroom for the first 6 months so that they can learn these basic learning skills, get used to being in a school and pick up some English oral language skills. And then once they're in the intensive LEAP classes, they kind of have those things established so that they can really just focus on the literacy and developing students' literacy skills. So this probably will, at some point in your career, be something you'll need to use to work with students. The step for students in ELD programs, there's 4 steps, and I'll show you that a little bit later. So So for my presentation, I'm going to go through strategies to use with kids, and I'm going to use this high-impact instructional response to sources of potential academic disadvantage that you have in your textbook. It's on page 26. So when we talk about students in ESL programs, we want to look at their linguistic diversity, their low socioeconomic status, is that an impact on the students, and also their marginalized status. So I'm really going to focus specifically a lot on some strategies around low socioeconomic status, because as you can see here, one of the qualifiers is inadequate access to print at home and at school. And I don't know what type of prenatal care or nutrition the child received, but probably a student in an ELD program did have access to print literacy skills. So that's something that, that we can assume is a big area of need. So the instructional response is to maximize literacy engagement. You want to get lots of books and resources at the child's level of reading and just kind of surround them by things that really engage them. And this is the challenge, is finding those resources, because if you're in a middle school, you may not have access to resources like this. I mean, at my school, we've had so many kids coming in that need this that I've been able to really build up a library of resources that we can pull on. But that might not be true in your situation. So I'm going to go through some places you can find resources. And of course, you continue to reinforce their academic language, you build their vocabulary. And marginalized status is probably a big part as well. They may have been very much marginalized at home, and we don't want that marginalization to continue in Canada, which unfortunately a lot of research is showing that it is. And a lot of kids are finding that their experiences here are almost just as bad as back home. So we want to do things to make it better. And I'll go over some strategies around that.